Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing Game of Thrones series, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the dungeons underneath King's Landing.
Oh.
Shout out Ned.
Poor guy. I'm so excited to be returning to Sansa. She's so fun to read because she's so sad.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about this chapter.
Oh, okay, cool.
Really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this too. This is also, I think this is our first Game of Thrones episode of 2025.
Yes,
so
it is.
Welcome
Happy
to
New
the
Year.
new year. We're recording this on New Year's Day, which is very fun.
The grind never stops.
It never stops. It's hard to have a podcast during the holidays, I gotta say.
is.
But it's fine. I love doing this and I'm glad we're here. Okay, well, should I give a recap of this chapter before we dive into the discussion? Okay, great. So just a quick spoiler reminder for everything in the books and the shows beyond this chapter. Shows? There's just the one. Okay. We don't acknowledge House of the Dragon in this home. So this is Sansa.
Go listen to our episodes.
Yeah, this is Game of Thrones, Sansa number 5. So it is King Joffrey's first court session. Big day for him. And Sansa is there, of course, and everyone is treating her like absolute garbage. They're just all looking at her like she has the plague because, of course, her father is a traitor, so she's having a hard time, as she tends to do. And Joffrey has a list of decrees. And the first decree that he lists out is that there's this long list of people who need to come to King's Landing and swear fealty to Joffrey, or be called traitors. And this, of course, includes, every single member of the Stark family, but also Lysa Arryn and her son, the Tullys, Walder Frey, and lots of other people.
The other Baratheons.
Yeah, the Baratheons, exactly. Like basically everybody who is not already said that they're on the side of the Lannisters. So he says that. And then he's got this whole list of decrees that are all these changes that he's making. He's cleaning house and starting afresh. He's building out his new cabinet, I suppose. And so the first order is that Tywin Lannister is being named Hand of the King in place of Ned. The next is that Cersei, who's currently ruling as Queen Regent, is also being placed on the small council instead of Stannis Baratheon. Janos Slynt, who is the commander of the City Watch, is being elevated to the title of Lord and is given Harrenhal, the biggest castle in the entire realm.
I love that he's repeatedly just called ugly through this chapter.
Yeah, Sansa is so funny because she, really puts a lot of stock in countenance and how people look like she's a 19th century author lady. And anyway, he's also put on the small council as well as being elevated to the status of Lord, even though he's ugly. And then, importantly, Sir Barristan Selmy, what?
Just the Shane Gillis and Rand Paul is ugly.
Yeah, Rand Paul. I can't do it. Okay. Anyways, Sir Barristan Selmy, who is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, is asked to step down, which you don't do. You serve there until you die, like a Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
But he's being asked to step down because he's too old and ineffective for Joffrey. And so he's asked to leave, and it's a very sad, disgraceful moment for him. And Jaime Lannister is elevated to the status of Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Of course, this leaves an empty spot on the Kingsguard because Jaime was already part of it. And so Sandor Clegane is now a member of the Kingsguard, even though he's not a knight, and they just decide that doesn't matter.
His whole job is war crimes.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's like, I'm not going to be a knight. And they're like, okay, that's fine. Like, it's crazy. And so at the end of all of this, they kind of have a moment of, speak now or forever hold your peace. And Sansa's like, I have a request. And she
This is Joffrey's big block of cheese day.
Yes, exactly. And we love a West Wing reference. So she asks that King Joffrey grant mercy for Ned. She knows that Ned is a traitor, but she says he was confused. He had milk of the poppy. He didn't know what he was saying. He should be punished, but also he should also be given mercy. And Joffrey says, okay, but only if he confesses to, saying the wrong thing. And he says that I am the king, then yeah, I'll grant him mercy. Of course, he doesn't stipulate what that means. But Sansa is sure that Ned will confess. And so she's happy and feels like she has done her job correctly. And that's where we end the chapter.
Just for posterity, I do have to note that you said King Joffrey about a minute ago.
I did say King Joffrey. Me and King Joffrey. Hey, Joffrey.
We will use that styling for the rest of this episode.
Okay, so King Joffrey. So yeah, this was fun. It was cool to see. I thought it was really fun and impressive the way George, my friend George, he and Joff, they're my buds. George was...
Joffrey, please.
Sorry. George was able to make us see King Joffrey for who he is and hate him, while at the same time, doing so through Sansa's POV, where she cannot see how much of a shithead he is. Like, I just think that's very impressive that I am able to simultaneously understand her point of view and believe it while also recognizing the obvious flaws in these characters, like on my own. Flaws as people, not as characters. So it was pretty fun to read.
The perspective is so permeable that you're very much getting the third person limited within Sansa's brain, but you can very easily see beyond that to that kind of third person omniscient.
Yeah, and there's also this element of, we're adults reading this. It's doubtful that a teenager is reading this book. I hope they're not. But if they are, I guess good for you. But we have a different worldview than Sansa does. We are able to recognize a lot of these, problems with King Joffrey, that Sansa is not able to, just based on our own, personal selves and histories and understandings of the world and recognition of the evils of this family. So it's pretty cool that he trusts us to get it, even though Sansa doesn't.
So do we, the reader, think Jaina Slynt is ugly?
Yes. 100%. That's unequivocal. That's objectively true. Yeah.
This felt classic to me and almost nostalgic for the earlier phase of our discussions. Now that it's 2025, we've been doing this for just about a year.
Yeah.
Actually, a little more than a year now.
Yeah, well, we did the prologue in December of 2023, and then we had a month off because we did the prologue early while we were finishing The Witcher.
Okay, so it's year 3, technically. No,
we've done this for about a year.
But yeah, no, this reminded me of those early days because it was high drama in that classic fantasy way.
Yeah.
So much of this chapter was about the Stark, Lannister, Baratheon conflicts and histories and grudges, which is what initially kind of caught my eye in the beginning of reading or watching this series. I think that's the first thing that gets you invested as a viewer, as a reader. It's that conflict. It's the political intrigue. It's watching the machinations of court. And during those discussions that we had at the beginning of last year, kind of the Winterfell era of the book, when Robert was visiting and all the characters were gathered around there, so many of our discussions came back to Macbeth. So I just kind of sensed that tonal retreat in this chapter. So I had Macbeth on my mind. So I was just kind of keeping that locked in the background. And there was a moment right at the beginning of the chapter where Sansa is walking through the Red Keep and through the throne room. And she's friendless and alone, and everyone's turning away from her. And the Macbeth tinglies started going.
Okay.
And it was specifically this line, which I felt like was kind of a feint directly aimed at me.
I think I know exactly what line you're talking about.
I think you do know what line I'm going to talk about. The line is, "It was as if she had become a ghost, dead before her time."
Loved that.
I'm going to read it again. "It was as if she had become a ghost, dead before her time." This is more complicated than I think I initially read it, because it's not as simple as saying Sansa feels like a ghost. It's almost removed from her. Her becoming almost a ghost dead before her time means it's not really her who's a ghost, but she's feeling what it would be like to be a ghost. She's almost becoming this vessel for these other spirits. She's almost a conduit.
Okay.
More than her herself experiencing this kind of ghosty perspective. And so many people have died or, like Ned, are on their way out so far in this book that it had me thinking about these other spirits, these other characters we've lost. And the question quickly became, who's the ghost? If it's not Sansa, if she's just kind of, whistling past the graveyard, getting a whiff of this experience, who would the ghost be? Of the characters we've lost so far, who would be watching this travesty play out on the Iron Throne and aching? Who would be watching that and have that kind of sticking in their craw in their mind, that awful reaction to watching this new king? And every time Joffrey's on the throne, he's fidgeting, he's fretting, he's unhappy, he's uncertain, he's almost haunted himself. So who is that ghost POV who's watching Joffrey? And the more I thought about that, with the Macbeth tinglies in the back of my head, it started to feel like the Ghost of Banquo scene.
Right.
Can you lay that out a little bit?
Yeah, that's so Banquo is one of I think the first person that Macbeth kills in his quest to become king based on the prophecy that he hears from the witches. And if not first, one of the first. And it sort of haunts him. And there's a scene in Macbeth where Macbeth is having dinner, at court with all these people and lords, and he keeps seeing the ghost of Banquo wander through the hall, and it's like haunting him and tormenting him and taunting him. And I think he eventually starts to talk to the ghost, and he sort of starts to in other people's eyes, go a little nuts, not being able to, he's like talking to nothing. And it is sort of like the first sign that he's becoming a little bit undone by everything that he's done in order to get power. Yeah.
So this is after Duncan is killed, obviously. And Banquo was supposed to be Macbeth's friend and confidant.
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing. It's a total betrayal. It's his friend.
Right.
Yeah. It's not just a random guy who was in the way.
He ordered the death of his best friend and his best friend's son.
Yes.
And now he feels this guilt manifest as the empty chair at the table that was supposed to be Banquo. He sees the ghost walk in and sit there, and it starts to haunt him and freak him out, and he ends up kind of talking to it by the end of the scene. I love this comparison, not just because I love Macbeth, but because of the way it repositions Joffrey. We've talked about reintroductions the last couple months, and I feel like this is a new form of Joffrey, now that he's officially the king. And here we're talking about Joffrey as the Macbeth figure.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And then I'm looking for, who is the ghost? Who is his Banquo? Who would be that close personal connection who's now haunting him? And I think the answer is right there in the first line of the chapter, and then repeated throughout the rest of the chapter. So I'm going to read it again. I'll read it twice just because I know for me, taking in that information, it helps with a little bit of repetition.
Yes, please.
Everyone's different like that. So this line that starts this chapter off is, "The walls of the throne room had been stripped bare, the hunting tapestries that King Robert loved taken down and stacked in the corner in an untidy heap. The walls of the throne room had been stripped bare, the hunting tapestries that King Robert loved taken down and stacked in the corner in an untidy heap."
Mm-hmm.
So that positions Robert. Look at the way they're trying to get rid of every sign of him. His finery, his personality, every sign of his rule. Yes, I mean, it couldn't be more explicit. The metaphor is just, it's right there.
I mean, even when they name Joffrey, like when they announce him, they say Joffrey of the houses Baratheon and Lannister. Like they have to say Baratheon because they think he is one, and also that's what makes him legitimate and makes him king. But they add in Lannister in there, and then they go and like call the other two brothers, Baratheon brothers, traitors, you know? So they're trying to completely eliminate him.
So the only thing that remains from Robert under this new rule of Joffrey's administration is that Baratheon claim.
Yes.
Everything else they're trying to strip away and remove. Every other sign of Robert Baratheon. And that pulls me back to the philosophy kind of thought experiments of the Ship of Theseus, where you have a ship, and as you use the ship and parts fall apart and break, you replace every new plank of wood, you make renovations, and eventually all of the original parts are gone, but the ship is still there.
Yeah, so when does it always stay the same ship? When does it become a different ship?
Is it the first plank that you replace? Is it the last one? It's that sort of argument. It's one of those grindstones that just, it always comes to mind in these. It's one of the best conversational philosophical ideas. And I was thinking of the Ship of Theseus in the way we're removing Robert Baratheon. And reviewing the chapter, we remove his tapestries. Not everyone knows this, but we remove his bloodline because Joffrey is not actually his son.
Yes, right.
We have everyone in the realm of note drawn back to King's Landing to swear a new oath of fealty to Joffrey, which overrules and kind of breaks the oaths of fealty they made to Robert.
Yes. Also, even Ned being imprisoned, like that's his best friend and hand of the king.
Yes, and that is kind of severing that Stark alliance with the crown. It's completely excising the Starks from any import for King's Landing. We also replace his hand of the king. We also replace his Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. We're removing as many planks as possible from this ship. That's what this chapter is.
Yeah.
This whole chapter is piecemeal. Joffrey and Cersei and the Small Council hacking away at the legacy and impact of Robert Baratheon.
I think that's totally fair, yeah.
Which almost makes it another coup.
Sure.
It's
like what would the first one be?
The first one would be Robert's rebellion.
Oh, okay.
And this chapter kind of positions Joffrey and the Lannisters as a whole. Their work, besides Tyrion, they sort of work as a unit.
Yeah.
It positions the Lannisters as the new usurpers.
Mm-hmm.
So the ghost that's haunting this new king is the last king. It's his father. So Robert Baratheon is the Banquo here. And I think that's the ghost seeing through Sansa, watching his rebellion being ripped apart piecemeal as this new rebellion, which is weirdly similar, takes its place. Like, that's the thing that's even more strange and fruitful here, is that this new usurper really strongly mirrors his predecessor.
Right, but we take it totally differently. It's not honorable or like exciting or righteous. It's traitorous and evil.
Yeah, this was the weirder thing that I got to as I kept digging in this theory, is that despite the lack of blood relation, which we've confirmed a dozen times over now, between Joffrey and Robert Baratheon, despite the stripping of all the signage, all the decisions, all the personality, anything Robert ever did, Joffrey feels more and more through this chapter like the new Robert Baratheon. Look at how he's taking the throne. He's effectively deposing the previous royal family. All of the Lannisters are in charge. Every living Lannister, except Tyrion, gets an elevation in this chapter, whereas every Baratheon gets, I don't know, basically put on a hit list.
Yeah, right.
Because he knows Renly and Stannis are not going to come bend the knee. So he's making them wanted. He's making them villains. In the same way, Robert treated the Targaryens when he came into power.
Yes.
And he killed all of them.
Killed all of them.
He
That's true.
usurped. He deposed the existing royal family.
You even get like Jaime the Kingslayer getting elevated once again to another like high position in spite of the treachery as we see it. Yeah.
And when Robert came to power, there was this cloud of disgrace and suspicion on him because he broke the royal line.
Yeah.
Because some people didn't recognize that he had any legitimate claim to the throne because he was a Baratheon. He's not blonde.
He's not Targaryen.
He's not even kind of blonde.
He's not even a product of incest.
But there's a similar cloud of suspicion and disgrace over Joffrey because of all the whisperings that he's a product of incest.
Yeah, right.
That he's not a legitimate Baratheon. Never mind being a Targaryen.
Sure.
And there's also this breaking of convention, which you spotlighted a second ago with his, brother-in-law killing the previous king. Here we have kind of a quieter breaking of convention when we appoint Cersei to the small council.
Yes, or even having Sandor Clegane be on the Kingsguard when he's not a knight.
Yes.
And giving, Janos Slynt, who's ugly, giving him a lordship and giving him Harrenhal. Like, all of this is breaking convention.
Right.
And it all, I mean, you can see I don't mean this literally, but the incestuous nature of having Cersei as Queen Regent and she's on the small council. Tywin Lannister is Hand of the King. Jaime Lannister is commander of the Kingsguard. Like, you can see the Lannisters just sinking their claws into everything. And it feels like nobody would ever have allowed this in the past.
No, it's such a naked power play. It is a usurping. It's them, it's them drinking the milkshake of every other important house or family in Westeros. It's not something they would have done before.
Yeah.
So back to that Ship of Theseus thing and all of these echoes, these similarities between how Robert came to power and how Joffrey is coming to power. It's interesting that Robert purge fails. Because you can take away everything he did and everything about him. You can kill him off. You can, disgrace his name and mock him openly in his court. And even though Joffrey's not his son, the guy sitting on the throne now feels like Robert Baratheon. He feels like this redux of Robert. Joffrey feels like a second Robert Baratheon, but worse in every way. He's more brutal. He's less experienced, and he's less counseled. The guy in his ear is Tywin Lannister instead of Ned Stark. But the weird kind of last cherry on top echo for me in this comparison is that Robert and Joffrey both have this kind of doomed Stark love. And that's where I get worried for Sansa, because now she's the new Lyanna.
Well, exactly. Yes. Really, really interesting. Yeah. Oh, I like her as Lyanna. And it's not in the same way. He doesn't actually love Sansa, but it's more in reverse, and it's all looking really bad. I really like this. Before I dive into what I was thinking about, which is very connected to what you just said.
Oh, good.
I have a question. If Robert is sort of the Banquo here, Sansa's like just the physical embodiment of it. But if Robert is acting as Banquo here, is Joffrey having a similar reaction to his Banquo that Macbeth has?
Well, I think so, because the chapter ends with Joffrey talking to Sansa and addressing her and addressing the treason and the murders that got him to the throne. So I think that is the same acknowledgement as Macbeth talking to the Ghost of Banquo at the end of that scene. And it's interesting that Sansa rises to fill that spot.
Well, and he also acts a little counter to how everybody around him is acting. Because when Sansa makes this plea, everybody around Joffrey is like, oh, well, I mean, a traitor is a traitor. Like,
Yes.
what are you talking about? Like, you're saying silly nonsense. You're just a child. But Joffrey kind of hears her out and says, no, like, let her speak. I want to hear what she has to say. And then he even says, okay, yeah, I'll grant him mercy if he confesses. I mean, who knows what that
But it makes him
means.
look bad.
It makes him look, separate from everybody else.
And weak.
He's going against what the rest of the group is doing.
The rest of the small council kind of calls him out as he's making that decision. They're very much advising him not to make that decision. And the whole effect of the Ghost of Banquo scene is that all these noblemen start to think Macbeth is nuts.
Yes, right. So they start to distrust him and lose their faith
and
in
that
him.
same seed of doubt, I think, is planted here in that Joffrey even takes Sansa's call by talking to her at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, and she doesn't understand that. She has no idea what kind of effect she's having. She thinks she's having a certain effect on Joffrey, but it's totally counter to what's actually happening.
And the thing they're discussing is Ned Stark. And of anyone in this room, the only person, if Robert Baratheon was alive, the only person he would advocate for or care about is Ned Stark.
Yeah.
So it is Sansa talking, but I really think that ghost that's talking through her, if she's more of this vessel or conduit, is Robert.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I really like that. That's a great way to look at this. I think that's so fascinating. And I love that you started with the tapestries because, of course, I was interested in the tapestries. A few chapters back, we've talked about those hunting tapestries on the wall in the throne room. We made a lot of connections between the hunting tapestry and the hunt that Robert's about to go on, or was about to go on, where he's looking for the White Hart. And we had this whole idea that the tapestries act sort of as a prophecy for Robert and the Starks and the Lannisters and what it's all going to mean.
That was fascinating.
It was really fun. And we sort of concluded that the tapestries foretelling the hunt that the Lannisters are going to be enacting upon the Baratheons and the Starks. Ned as the White Hart. Remember, he's dressed in all white in that throne room scene. And so Ned is like the key, victim of this hunt, the target. But that the Baratheons will also fall as a result of the, aggression of the Lannisters. And that was really fun. But so here, the tapestries, as you said, have been pulled off the wall. The walls have been stripped bare, and the tapestries are in a huddle in the corner. And that makes sense because the prophecy I just described has happened. Like the Robert Baratheon is dead. The other two Baratheons are, traitors basically, and they're being not quite ordered to be killed yet. They're still being called to come swear fealty, but we know that they won't. And of course, Ned is imprisoned, and like that's all happened now. Like that's basically done, or is in the process of being completed. So it makes sense that those be removed. But what's interesting is that there's not a new tapestry on the wall. There's not a new Lannisterian prophecy. And so it leaves you wondering, what is this prophecy? Like, what is the future of Joffrey as king? And I'm sort of left to conclude one of two different possibilities. One is that Joffrey has no future as king. It's bare, it's nothing. And that's kind of true. I mean, we know he stays king until the third book when he's killed. But what does he really accomplish? He has a tie with the Martells and stuff, and things happen during the War of the Five Kings that I can't remember. But Joffrey himself isn't really doing a whole lot. It is like basically the people around him being in charge. It's his mother, it's Tywin, it's Jaime, like it's even Tyrion when he becomes Hand.
He's got like half a dozen regents.
Yeah, right. It's really not Joffrey doing anything or affecting any change other than killing Ned and killing some other people. He doesn't have much of a future as king. He's only going to live about, a year or so more. So that's one way you could interpret it. But the other way, which I think you sort of hinted at based on this stuff you're talking about, how they're trying to erase all signs of Robert and like start their own thing. It's almost like the Lannisters are writing their own prophecy in real time. All of these changes that they make by, adding different people to the small council, elevating ugly Janos Slint, making the Hound a member of the Kingsguard, making all these changes is like their way of sort of crafting their own story in real time. And I think that's what the Lannisters are really good at. They're good at making things work for them, manipulating the situation. I mean, it's not that they don't plan ahead. They're not making it up as they go. They certainly plan ahead. I mean, they're always playing 4D chess. Like, they're good at that, but it's more that they're not waiting for a prophecy to be written about them. They make it happen. The Lannisters are doers. And versus if you think about somebody like the Targaryens, who also take action significantly, but I feel like the Targaryens, what we learned a lot from our Fire and Blood coverage and just our
over on Patreon,
and all those discussions, and even talking about Dany, is that the Targaryens rely so heavily on the mysticism about them. The fact that they're connected to old Valyria, they have that old Valyrian blood. They're, prophesied to be the rulers of King's Landing. The dragons are magical gods. Like, they rely on that sort of thinking much more so than the Lannisters. The Lannisters just get stuff done, and they're really good at that. And so that seems to be what's happening here, is they don't have a prophecy to rely on. They're just making things happen in real time. And I think what's really cool about this is how Sansa's interacting with all of this, because Sansa has her own idea of what the prophecy of King Joffrey is. She's got this own song and prophecy in her head. That's what we keep going back to with Sansa, is she's trying so hard to make her life like a song. She's trying so hard to give herself this legendary story, this fairy tale life. And so she keeps saying to herself over and over again, it will all come out well. Joff loves me. He must listen to me. Be the king I know you are. I love you. She's trying so hard to make it happen, but we know that this exists only in her head. In reality, the walls are bare. There's nothing on the walls. It's just in her head. And that's like one of the saddest parts about this whole thing. But I was really struck by the lack of prophecy that the Lannisters rely on, because they don't care about that. I really don't think they do.
Or if they do, they don't want to be predictable. I think it's interesting that the tapestries almost become evidence. They're almost incriminating, because it lays out the plan of what they did. And their plan now, in not trusting any outsiders and replacing as many people as they can with their own loyalists, if not family members, they're closing ranks. They're circling the wagon. So putting up a new tapestry would almost be like putting up their battle plans.
That's true. That's
so I don't think they want to be predictable at all.
Yeah, I think you're right. And even if you think about, okay, if the Baratheons do things like hunting tapestries as their prophecy, if the Targaryens rely on their strong heritage and their, godlike creatures that only they can control, the Starks don't really have prophecy so much as they have their crypts and their old gods and their strong history in the north, and like that constancy, the winter is coming thing, like that they're always there. They have the blood of the first men. There's sort of that old just majesty to them, similar to the Targaryens, actually. Like, that's kind of what they rely on, versus the Lannisters, who are doing this entirely different thing.
Yeah, the Baratheon, obviously you have the lineage for the Targaryens. They have the legacy play. They have the dragon skulls. They have
the pure blood.
History, sure.
Yeah.
But when the first Baratheon king takes over, he almost needs to develop his own history or culture or something to fill the room to replace all of that legacy that he's just deposed. I think the second time you depose that, there's less expectation there. Because what the Lannisters have is money and power. They don't need the cultural backdrop.
No, they don't.
People fear them.
And I think one of the biggest flaws that the Lannisters make in this whole thing is trying to emulate a house like the Targaryens, doing it this different way. And I mean that by Jaime and Cersei having their relationship and having their pure blood kids in their minds, right? Like, that is their biggest mistake, I think. I don't even mean morally. I just mean in their quest for power. Like, that's, I think, the worst thing they did, because no matter how much money and power they have, Westeros is never going to accept Joffrey as king once they know the truth. And they know that. And so that's like the hardest part, is that they can't do it like the Targaryens did it. They have to do it Lannister style, and this is a mistake.
We talked so much about Tywin in the last few weeks, and I'm tempted to blame him because I know he's about to lose to Robb Stark. But I just don't believe that Tywin would ever sign off on the way they got rid of Barristan Selmy. Never.
Yeah, he would have done it a little bit differently.
This is a Cersei plan. Tywin is not that sloppy.
Yeah, like, you can tell.
In terms of the Lannisters, we keep bringing up this Exorcist quote of a much too vulgar display of power.
Yeah.
That's what this chapter is. And I have to believe Tywin is a better tactician than that.
Yeah, I mean, even I this is fun. The way that Joffrey is dressed at the beginning of this scene. Everybody's wearing black because they're in mourning for King Robert, but Joffrey is wearing like a black doublet thing with like a red cape, and the black thing that he's wearing is encrusted with red rubies, and his crown has red rubies and black diamonds.
It's slashed with crimson.
Yes, so he's got some gold, but he's mostly wearing black and red, which is the color of the Targaryens. So again, we've got this sort of like imitation of these other houses, but they're not quite achieving it.
Because I think you can argue that Robert Baratheon, with his rebellion, took the throne. Mm-hmm. But I think the Lannisters, doing this full court press, taking every position of power, they want to be conquerors. Mm-hmm. So recalling Aegon, pulling back to some of that Targaryen grandeur, as well as imitating the incest, mm-hmm. I think that's more of their aspiration. I think they want to be like Targaryens. They want a dynasty, despite what we talked about last time with Tywin not having any sort of dynastic aspiration. Mm-hmm. I think obviously Cersei does, because she's now the regent for her son.
Yes, yeah, and the sad thing is they never achieve it. The Lannisters are very powerful, and they are powerful for a long time, but it's not in the way that they want to be. So they keep trying to fall on different methods that don't work quite as well.
And you talked about Fire and Blood, which we went through chapter by chapter over in a Patreon series last year. I think some of our best episodes of last year. Joffrey dressing like a Targaryen here to sort of, I don't know, inherit some of that that beauty and that grandeur.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of Aegon II putting on Aegon the Conqueror's armor.
Yeah, definitely. But it doesn't quite fit him, and it ends up betraying him.
It is grasping, and you pale by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sloppy amateur mistake.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, I loved this chapter.
Me too. It was really fun. Uh-huh. Next chapter, we're going to Ned
for the
after
first time
a long
in
time.
Months, I think.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. Like I'm excited to see Ned. I wonder how he's doing down there in the dungeons.
I think this is the scene where Varys visits him wearing that little hat.
I hope so.
Like where he was wearing the hoodie. Do you remember?
Hoodie Varys?
Yeah.
Can't wait for that.
Hoodie Varys will be back next week.
Cool.
As will we. If you want even more episodes from us, of course, we just dropped about 1 million episodes at the end of 2024. We did The Breckies, our award show, talking about our favorite works of art from the year.
I always love
Over
those.
on Patreon, we did like a 90-minute blowout year in review, where we talked about over 50 of the works of art that kind of defined this year. We developed this theory that 2024 was the year of disappointments and surprises. Everything we were looking forward to pretty much disappointed us, and everything else became this wonderful surprise. We went out of our comfort zone. We discovered some really, really wonderful works of art. So that's over on Patreon. The Breckies were last week. We just finished up our entire Robert Eggers retrospective, going through all of his films, back from the original short films all the way through Nosferatu. We finished up that series a couple weeks ago, and now in the brand new year we have big new plans, but we have years of bonus episodes piled up over on Patreon. $2 a month. You can support the show and get access to all of those episodes.
Yes, thank you all so much for listening. Please let us know what you thought of this chapter, of our thoughts, down in the comments below if you're on YouTube, or if you're just listening, send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. Also, quick reminder that Cam's book Lemon Tarts in Space was released a couple months ago, and it is available for purchase as a novel or an audio drama.
New Year's resolution. Maybe you want to start a fun new book.
Oh, try a new genre.
Consider this light science fiction dark comedy. Ridley Scott's Alien by way of Monty Python.
It is fabulous. Cam has lots of stuff. This is his latest book, and y'all are going to love it. Again, if you like a single moment of this show, you will really enjoy Lemon Tarts in Space. So go give that a listen, or a read, or whatever
audio drama or novel, whatever works for you. But we will be back here on Tuesday with another brand new episode.